So great, we've sort of touched on some things where you might need to gain some professional guidance and assessment. What are some non-pharmacological strategies that someone can do to maybe ease or help alleviate or maybe even reverse? You know?
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to say something real
Sure,
quick.
please
though.
do. Absolutely.
That comment of the common cold of the mental health industry is basically what I'm saying with that is that most any professional that is a counselor or the like should understand depression.
Mm-hmm.
It's very common, and almost everyone that you meet, you screen for depression at least, and a good majority of your clients have depression.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you can have confidence of just about any day that you go to, they should be able to evaluate for that.
That's good to know.
I think that, and also anxiety, because anxiety is probably the most common problem that they deal with in primary care,
Yeah.
and as well as a counselor.
Well, maybe we should segue into anxiety, you know?
Okay.
And then we can talk about the non.
Well, and that's good
you
because, no, that's a good idea because in some ways it's going to be the same answer.
I hear.
Yeah.
It was for me. So,
Yeah.
you know, with the pandemic, with the global circumstance, with the changes in media, and it's just gotten a little overloading with all this information we're receiving, numbing, if you will.
Yeah.
Anxiety, clinical anxiety versus, you know, just some transient normal nervousness or anxiety.
Okay,
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and I'd kind of like to maybe diverge a little bit.
Please.
And talk about what is stress and what's happening in the body. Why is that?
Yes.
And a discussion about the mind-body connection.
Please.
I think it would be worthwhile to discuss that at this point because it's related, and we can even refer back to the depression discussion.
Can't have one without the other, right?
No. You know, and basically, anxiety, to look at anxiety, it's basically a response to fear. And so fear happens in the body whenever we perceive threat, and then our sympathetic nervous system kicks in. So it's a sympathetic response.
The fight or flight.
The fight or flight response, yeah. And most people know what that is. But to lend a little bit more to it is worth discussing because it can lead to understanding how stress works can lead to those solutions of what to do instead.
Yeah, okay.
And so the sympathetic response happens whenever we have a perception of threat. So in other words, the perception is significant because it doesn't have to be real, but you can believe it to be real. Or you can think about it.
It could be a created thought.
It can be a creative
nothing
thought.
to do with
It can be a
reality.
memory.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so you're creating a world in your mind, basically, of being in that place. It's what I call the as-if loop, and that's not coming from me. That's Antonio Damasio, but the brain has the capability to recreate neural events because basically that's what a memory is. It's a recreation of something you've experienced before, and you're using the same neurons to do it. And so you're basically creating a situation that you've been in previously. And so when you're in that situation, you're going to feel as if you're there, as if that's really happening. And it's important to understand that because sometimes that's what we're fearing or we're remembering, and that it creates that environment. It's just like, you know, when you watch a movie and they create a really graphic scene or a scary scene, whether it's the music playing or whatever, then you're going to feel that.
Personal example, you know, when I called it, I'm sure this is not the clinical terminology for it, but I called it lost in my head. I had an inability to step outside myself and really kind of see things from a different perspective. It's almost like I'm lost in my own head.
Yeah.
Then I start thinking about what ifs, and I hope I'm not in that situation again. You know, and you start
Yeah.
ruminating on these thoughts.
Yeah.
And my fight or flight response was totally
Oh
elevated.
yeah, oh yeah.
I
And it's going to
paused,
put you in a prolonged state.
and that is horrible for your health.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and again, this is why I think it's important to talk about that mind-body connection. That you can think those thoughts and you feel as if you're there, and your body is going to respond to as if you're there, and you're going to be there.
And it's something that is just created.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like it may not even be a real threat or
Yeah.
even a possibility of a real threat, but it's
Yeah.
created.
Well, and a bit of a segue here is that I'm guessing part of what was happening to you is I'm guessing that you had those experiences during your depressive episode.
Absolutely.
And so there's a
Yeah.
a relationship between anxiety and depression.
Okay.
And so when you're depressed, you become much more susceptible to harm, to vulnerability, to problems. And so when you're depressed, you're much more easily going to feel anxiety. And consequently, of course, a lot of times, in my opinion, depression is the result of having been in a prolonged state of anxiety. So it could be, you were fine to a point, and then at some point, your body kind of said, okay, this is too much.
So what you're saying, Corby, is a prolonged state of fight or flight can definitely lead you into
Absolutely.
depression. Okay.
Yeah, it can, and I can talk a little bit more about that. But
Sure.
and as I recall talking to you, I think that's what happened is you're doing your new job, you was trying to do a really good job, and there was this worry going on, and what if? Am I good enough? And so all that thoughts about yourself.
And really
Became
this
reality.
this came not necessarily from a trauma. I mean, my wife tells me she's pregnant. We're super excited. Moved to Alaska, new life, beautiful job, new home.
Yeah,
But all those good stressors,
became too much.
so
Yeah. So at some point your body said, okay, this is too much stress.
yeah.
And so the fight or flight response, the sympathetic response is basically when that happens, when we perceive a threat, or I say even we perceive a demand, because a demand can become a threat. And I use the example of paying your mortgage or your rent. So if you don't pay your rent, it's a demand. And then if you don't pay it long enough, then at some point you're going to get kicked out, and then it becomes a threat. So I think it's important to understand that it responds to either of those perceptions.
Wow.
So you can ask yourself the question of where's the threat coming from. So if for example you're feeling stress or anxiety, to ask yourself that question so that you can localize the stimulus and ask yourself the question, is that something not that I'm creating, but that I'm entertaining in my mind and worrying about that it could come?
Right.
That's often a precursor to anxiety. So how real is it? Is that something that I feel that demand? Because I think one thing that happens when you're having the ruminations that you were talking about, it becomes a self-perpetuating
Like I was
cycle.
telling you, it's sort of you're lost in your brain. So it's
Yeah.
really nice to have a medical trained professional to sort of train you
Yeah.
to step back outside of yourself and see these
Yeah.
things so that you can
Yeah.
ease, strategize, maybe you reverse these
Yeah.
conditions.
Absolutely.
Is that possible?
Absolutely.
Okay.